I'm preparing to live stream the meeting on Facebook, so if you could give me just a second, John, then you can go ahead.
Nick just texted him, so he might respond here in a minute.
Okay. I don't.
I think we can probably go ahead, and if he shows up, he can take over if he wants to. I didn't hear anything from him.
Okay, I'll call the meeting of the Bath Charter Township Planning Commission order. It's the 8th of June at 6:03 p.m.
I'll do it on my personal phone.
If everybody would identify their name and location they're transmitting from, I would appreciate it for the record. Thank you.
Baker, I'll do roll call. Baker,
Attending from office, Bath Township.
I'm just going in order on my screen here. Reich,
I'm at my garage, Superior Car Care on Main Street in Bath Township.
Gutsky,
I am at my home in Bath Township.
Fewens Bliss,
Here at my home in Bath Township.
and Severy.
Attending from my home in Bath Township.
Well, so they have to have 50%.
Great, thank you. Karen practicing her librarian.
Too many meetings at home.
Okay. John, do you have the agenda in front of you?
No, I do not.
Okay, so next would be the.
Call the meeting to order.
Okay, next would be the approval of the agenda, and I do have an item to add.
Okay, go ahead.
Under old business, I'd like to add A&D repair. The township board last night voted to approve their special use permit with the conditions. One of those conditions that had been recommended by the Planning Commission earlier this year was that the Planning Commission would have final say on the private sewer design. It's my understanding that John was the one who really wanted to see that. And John, I know you were in the township offices today, and it's my understanding you're comfortable with that. So we'll add that under old business.
Okay. Does anyone else got anything else they'd like to add to agenda?
No.
I get a
I'll
motion
move to approve as
the
amended,
agenda?
John.
Okay, I'm sorry, Joel,
Yeah, I'll move to approve as amended.
thank you, Joel. Is there a
Sure.
second?
I second.
Thank you, George. Those approved, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone disapproves, say aye. Thank you. Okay, let's go to any conflict of interest that anyone has in the agenda items.
No.
Hearing none, we'll proceed. Okay.
General public comment.
Oh, yes, thank you. Is there any general public contact? Aaron, do you want to monitor that, please?
Yes, if anybody has public comment at this time, you can raise your hand or dial *9.
John, I just sent you the agenda on your phone.
Oh, thank you, George.
I am not seeing anyone raising their hand or indicating they would like to make a public statement.
Okay, hearing none, we'll proceed. Can I get a motion on the minutes of the May 25th meeting or any changes that you'd like to make to it?
I have
Make
one
a-
revision, one comment.
Go ahead, Ray.
under the DDA, my comment in there talked about, I think they said something about the meetings didn't have any structure. I did not say that because I have no idea, because I've never been to a DDA meeting. What I think I said was that there was a lack of quorum at most of those, so they couldn't meet. That was the big problem, I think. So, but just make that revision. It wasn't structure, it was quorum.
Noted.
Any other comments on the minutes to the meeting?
I move they
Go
be
ahead,
approved
George.
as amended.
And can I get a second?
I second to approve as amended.
Thank you. And all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, let's proceed. Next on the agenda, just let me boot up. New business?
Communications, John.
Oh, I'm sorry,
That's all right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
communications.
So I
Are there
do,
any, Nick?
I do just have one. Karen may or may not laugh at me for making a slightly big deal out of this. So today is my 1 year anniversary, and I just thought I'd give a quick recap on everything that we've accomplished in the past year. We have completely overhauled our planned unit development ordinance. The medical marijuana ordinance was adopted a couple weeks after I started. Of course, we've adopted our adult use ordinance. When that actually ends up getting utilized, I'm not sure, but we did spend countless hours revising that. And speaking of countless hours, I would say we've spent quite a few hours working on the comprehensive plan as well. And also the landscape ordinance that I'm hoping we'll vote on tonight, has had quite a bit of time spent on it as well. So, given what we've been dealing with in terms of a pandemic and not being able to meet in person, I think we've gotten a lot done. And I'm looking forward to seeing what we can get done over the next year. And that's all I have for communications.
Thank you, Nick. Okay, the next item on the agenda is a new discussion item for self-storage, or assume that's what it is.
Mhm.
Jeff, if you're here, would you like to give us a little rundown, or Nick, either one of you?
I'm happy to hand it over to Jeff. It's his project and he's more familiar with it than me. I haven't written up a staff report yet because this is just introduction. So I'll let Jeff speak.
Sure. Good evening, planning commissioners. So recently we submitted most of the documents required to begin the process on a project at 7785 East Saginaw Parcel B, which is directly adjacent to the Parcel C project, which we're all familiar with. We've been working on for a number of years now. So essentially we, over that period of time, doing what we do, we're staring at a piece of dirt that was covered in a bunch of concrete debris and stuff like that, and decided we wanted to improve it. And we've come up with a plan and we're ready to execute that plan. And I would like to invite our project coordinator, Matthew Higgins, to introduce that for us. Are you unmuted, Matthew?
Yes, I believe I am, Jeff. All right, so thank you, Jeff, and hello, everybody. My name is Matthew Higgins. As Jeff said, I am a coordinator for this project, and I've been working under his wing for about a year now. And I'm super excited to be here and introduce you all to this project. So to begin, we have proposed 6 buildings, and it has a total building footprint of 80,000 square feet, give or take. The southernmost building is a 2-story that is built into a hill. And this building will have a very nice facade on it. We are looking currently at masonry and glasswork, a mix of that. And the site itself is going to be small warehousing and, oh, thank you. There we go. All right, now that you can see what I'm talking about. So the southernmost building, building A, as you can see, there's the 6 buildings, and that building A is our 2-story built into a hill. And like I said, it'll have a facade, and that is also where we will have our on-site property management. The entire facility itself is going to be small warehousing and storage. Access to the site will be given through our through the parcel to the south. We'll have a paved drive that leads up into the parcel. If you want to scroll down a little bit, I'm not sure if this site plan shows that. Yep. So as you can see, there is a paved drive that leads up through the southern parcel. So access is going to be given from Lansing Road. And if needed, in rare circumstances, we do have an easement over the drive on the neighboring parcel. So in rare circumstances, that's going to be just a secondary access, but primary access is going to be that paved drive that goes through the southernmost parcel. Going back to the buildings, so we have that 2-story. The remainder, the other 5 buildings, those are just going to be normal 1-story. In terms of lighting, there will be lights mounted on the walls. They will all be dark sky compliant. And in terms of drainage, if you look at the contour lines, you can see that the entire site slopes to the north and to the west. And running along those edges of the property, we have a vegetated swale that's going to act as a storm channel. And that vegetated swale, it's going to be seeded. It'll be very densely vegetated with native plants. And these plants are going to slow down the speed of the water flowing into the retention pond. And it'll also filter out a lot of pollutants. And so this will serve to mitigate flooding and also stop pollutants from ever reaching the watershed. And as you can see, we have that large retention pond to the north to collect all the water that we need. So that's kind of just a broad overview of this site, and I'm more than happy to take all questions and comments that you guys have.
Go ahead, Joel.
Apologies, I put myself on mute. The one thing that jumped out me initially was the amount of parking that appears on this preliminary plan, and it seems overly abundant, and that's a current event for the Planning Commission. I know, I mean, I suppose we're gonna have further discussion over this, but I was wondering why that so much parking was necessary.
So I'll jump in there. If you're, Joel, speaking of the parking on the north or east part of the parcel,
Correct.
that's actually structured rentable parking spaces that we were thinking for business use or potentially RV storage type things of that nature.
Gotcha, okay.
But I agree with you. That would be, so the parking for the actual users of the site would exist on the southern boundary by the 2-story building.
Well, even there, that looks like a overabundance of parking just for the southern portion there. I don't know that we would require that in the end.
Well, you're speaking my language.
I mean,
but,
this has been current events for the Planning Commission, so
yeah.
I just look at that. I don't know what's the nature of the building on the southernmost edge there.
So that would be a 2-story climate controlled building that would contain an on-site manager office, which would require a constant parking spot. And then it would have access at the grade level on the southern entry and then access at the grade level on the northern entry. So, you know, I think on the site plan, there's only maybe 8 parking spaces-ish represented, which, you know, I'm always the proponent for less parking. So like I said, we're happy to revise that, but that's kind of where we shot at it.
Well, I'll reserve comment later on in the process, but that was just my initial thought.
Appreciate it.
Joel, were you talking about the very, very southern building?
Yes. Yes, Ryan.
Okay. That's not part of this, right?
Is
To
that
answer
prior to
your
me?
question,
That's the other project.
Commissioner Bliss is correct. So if you look at the site plan, there's a delineation approximately where the leg of the parcel on the south, right there. Yep. So that where Nick is pointing there actually represents the lot line. So the parking for that southern building, when we're talking about the southern building, is the one that's directly above the cursor.
Predates me on the Planning Commission. I stand corrected. Thanks.
Okay, are there any other comments for Jeff at this time? Go ahead, Ray.
Yeah, one of these plans shows a retention basin on the northeast corner of this lot also.
Yes, so the retention basin on the northeast corner was found to be redundant. We were able to find the volume in the single basin, which was more by just doing some reshaping and redesign of it, which was found just to be more efficient. So we didn't actually have to produce two of them.
Okay. Now, this is a pretty large project. Are you going to build this in phases, do you know yet? Or is it going to be all one project, or do you know?
We're currently, if we can get the entitlements off the ground fast enough, we're planning on doing it as one phase.
I'm just curious if there's that much demand for storage.
There is. It's filling a gap. You know, traditional mini storage versus the kind. That's why when Matthew introduced it, he said we're in the storage plus light industrial business. There's a huge lack of industrial space available right now, so a lot of spaces like this are filling in the gaps for contractors and people that have been displaced by various other uses, which you are familiar with, I'm sure. So yeah, the facilities are in super high demand right now, and probably will be into the future as well.
This may be a question more for Nick than anybody else, but landscaping, with our new landscape ordinance that we're looking at, it requires like depending on whether this is commercial or industrial requires 20% landscaped area. I don't know how we're gonna, now I don't know if this is considered industrial or commercial.
So we've tried to anticipate, because we've seen that coming as well, and we've been paying attention to the Planning Commission's discussion on the landscape ordinance. We've tried to anticipate that going into this, and we're hoping that the vegetative swale, typically we were reading about vegetative swales, and those are typically able to be included in coverage for a landscape ordinance. So that would be part of that discussion. And we actually went back to our landscape designer after the initial iteration of this and asked them to take that into consideration on our kind of evolution of our landscape plan.
Okay.
I've got a question, Nick. You said you're thinking about light industrial and contractors. Is there enough space in these between buildings for a contractor to pull in a crew cab pickup and a trailer and be able to negotiate maybe entering the building to unload or anything like that?
We believe so, based on our designs, and that would be part of a leasing strategy too. If it was leased to a contractor, certain units would be more appropriate for that, and certain units would be less appropriate for that type of use.
Yeah, that's very applicable.
I agree.
Any other questions from commissioners at this point?
Yeah, kind of following up on what you just talked about, access, having all the access to this site go through the southern property, to me, doesn't seem like a great idea. I like your secondary access off that road a whole lot better, because if you got, like we just talking about, large trucks or trailers coming through that other parking lot, that's not an ideal situation.
We agree with that position. The primary use of our site would be a lot less of a heavy user. For instance, you know, the person who we acquired the property from, Mr. Hosford, operates, you know, big dump trucks and stuff like that up and down the property that we have an easement over. We wouldn't anticipate any usage that was that heavy. If we did have, you know, a painter that was using some space in the interim or something like that, they typically don't have equipment that's that significant. But in the case that was necessary, we do have that ancillary option of utilizing the easement space. So we've always enjoyed the idea that we could use either if the need presented itself.
Yeah, I kind of like the other one as being a primary access rather than going through that parking lot.
Yeah, the main issue for us there is that we don't own it, right? So we have the legal ability to pass over it, but we don't own it. So we don't want to rely upon improvements to it or anything like that for our plan, because it would require something that's out of our control.
Right.
And just to add to that, for what it's worth, I feel a little inappropriate. I feel like I'm lecturing a civil engineer, Ray, but storage facilities do have pretty low parking volume. So in terms of number of vehicles, I think that's not much of a concern.
Yeah, they have, we've done some studies there too. They have a shockingly low amount of traffic that go to and from them. So for this particular parcel, as you're all familiar, it's not served by sewer. There are some other issues with it, and this use just seems to really fit nicely because, to use that parcel, knowing that it's tucked away back there and access could be more difficult for a lot of different uses, and knowing that, at least in the very near term, it's not served by some of these utilities, this seems to be the highest and best use.
So when you mentioned it's not served by sewer, there's going to have to be sewer for that south building, right?
There would need to be on-site treatment. So it would basically be for a single restroom, and that's really it. So on-site treatment should be relatively easy to get done there.
If there are no more comments or concerns, I just want to remind everybody our next planning commission meeting is actually 3 weeks out. I've received even more documentation from the applicant just today in terms of engineered drawings. So because this project requires a special use, and like I said, we have 3 weeks until our next meeting, I'd really like to request that we schedule that public hearing for June 29th. That should give sufficient time for agency reviews.
Are there any other questions? This is just a preliminary plan, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
That's correct. I would expect that in the next 3 weeks, we actually today received 3D renderings, flyover images, all kinds of stuff like that. So I would anticipate that by a public hearing, even well in advance of a public hearing, we would be able to provide a lot of those things to the Planning Commission, as well as we've had some communication with the agencies already, because we've been involved with them in the development of the parcel to the south, and a lot of this has been part of that conversation over the past few months. So we're ahead of the curve with a lot of those things. So we feel very comfortable that inside of the next 2 to 3 weeks, we should be able to have everything required there.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Any other comments from commissioners? Okay, let's move on to the next item, Nick, the A&D repair.
Before we do that, I'd just like to get confirmation as to whether there's comfort with a public hearing on the 29th or not.
I don't know. What's the feeling of everybody comfortable with that, or do we want to look at this before a public hearing further?
I'm likely going to have to join by phone, to be honest with you. I didn't plan on the meeting on the 29th. I thought it was on the 22nd. I've got a previous engagement on the southwest side of the state.
We had agreed to move that. Was that our last meeting or the meeting before that? We agreed to move it to the 29th.
It's probably the last one because I wasn't here, Nick.
That checks out.
That's okay. I can join by phone.
Okay. I think in terms of scheduling the public hearing, the main concern there should be, from my standpoint, right, making sure we have all the documentation and that it can go through an administrative review. From that standpoint, I'm comfortable that I have everything. And what I don't want to do is add an extra 2 weeks to review and approval time if it's unnecessary.
I have no problem with the 29th.
Okay. Any objections to the 29th? Okay, let's do the 29th, Nick.
Great, thank you.
Time for a recess. Okay, let's move to the next item. I think it's A&D repair.
Yep, so just as I stated, last night, the Township Board approved the special use permit with the conditions that had been recommended by the Planning Commission. Everything is in place. We have all of the approval paperwork. The only thing that's been outstanding is that condition that the Planning Commission had the final right of review of the private sanitary sewer connection. As I stated at the beginning of the meeting, I think it was John who had interest in seeing that.
That's correct.
And John, it's my understanding that, you're comfortable with the design of it. And
Yeah, I thought it was a very clean design, and SCUMA's already looked it over.
Yes.
They approved it. So
Yes.
the only thing I think that we're still waiting on is the draft of the easement and the transfer of rights to that in case of property exchanges hands. And I understand that our attorney's drawn that up, and A&D is going to pay for that legal document. So until we get that, I think we can go ahead, but we want to make sure that that is in order before we actually approve the site plan, or not the site plan, but before we approve any occupancy permit for this project.
Mhm. Yep, I don't anticipate that being an issue.
No, I don't either, since it's our attorney that's drafting it up at A&D's expense.
Yeah, Karen, and remind me, I think legal counsel said he should have that by the end of the week. Okay. Okay, so just for anybody who didn't see, she did say yes with a thumbs up.
Yep. Yep.
So
I see Eric just logged in.
Well, yeah, I gave a thumbs up that the
Yeah.
money, I emailed Nick today to get that escrow rolling.
Mhm.
So we're hopefully maybe talking soon to get, but yeah, absolutely. We're going to be leaving money with the township to get any of that paid for right away. So.
Yeah, we should be good, John.
Well, let's, do we need any, I guess we do need a motion on this, don't we? Because we did hold it up.
I would say so because it was a condition, so we should have a motion to say that condition is approved.
Will somebody make a motion to this effect, please?
And on mute, Joel.
So moved. I apologize.
Is there a second?
I'll second with, did you say with conditions, Joel?
Yes, that was so moved as was with the conditions.
I support that.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion on this item? Okay, those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, that takes care of that item. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Eric will be in touch tomorrow.
Thanks, Nick. Appreciate it, everybody.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric.
Have a good evening.
You too.
Back to the agenda. It looks like next is landscape ordinance.
Landscaping, yes. And you want to bring us up to date on this, Dick?
Yeah, so I'll go through the changes. I just included a clean copy. I didn't want to get too confusing again. Excuse me. So the main thing I've been working on over the past couple of weeks is just making sure that there's very clear language as to when this ordinance applies and when it does not. So if you're looking at that first page of the draft language, the exemption section has been cleaned up a little bit, clarifying that any development in the rural district is exempt with the exception of a planned unit development or a performance subdivision. Solely, the reason those two would not be exempt is solely because they may include more intensive land uses that would justify utilizing the landscape ordinance. Again, we've already had that agricultural exemption discussed. I just cleared this language up. So agricultural uses, regardless of what district they're in, are exempt. And then again, as we've talked about at length, the single family exemption in that, an individual home would be exempt. But if a developer were constructing a new subdivision or site condominiums or other residential development, it would be the responsibility of the developer to adhere to this ordinance at that time. And then it would be the developer or their authorized agent or the homeowner or a homeowners association's responsibility for maintaining that landscaping. The next change to language would be at the top of the next page. As I was talking with board members about this draft, oh, now the dogs, now we're gonna fight? Really? This is great timing. One
Can-
moment, please. Just. Been on the fence about going back in person, but I'm ready now.
Happy anniversary.
All right, so in talking with board members, I spoke with the supervisor, and she actually asked me why we didn't have language in here about sidewalks. I thought that was a fair question, and I don't know that this is necessarily the right spot to include that language. But what we've added is essentially some language here stating that if the Planning Commission deems it appropriate, they would have the ability to require sidewalks for any project that is required to adhere to this ordinance. So again, that's not mandatory sidewalks. It's solely if the Planning Commission deems it appropriate for that particular site. I think that eliminates possible issues where you have sidewalks to nowhere, or you have one parcel with a sidewalk, whereas on either side it may not. But if we feel that it really is appropriate, it gives the Planning Commission that ability to require those. So that was one thing that was added.
Can you use the reference numbers for me, Nick, so I can find them faster?
Sure. So like I said, it's at the top of the second page. Of the draft.
I'm with you. I'm with you so far.
Or no, sorry, it's E.
One question,
Yep.
Nick.
Sure.
Nick, back on the rural exemption.
Mhm.
Now, if somebody wanted to come in and put commercial or industrial, that would require rezoning. Is that correct?
There are almost no uses that would be allowed in the rural district that they would be able to engage in. So I'm going to pull that language back up so I can tell you confidently what they would be able to do in that district. But from my recollection, it's only commercial uses that would be oriented towards rural, such as veterinarians' offices or things like that. So from a by right standpoint, other than agriculture, there are no commercial uses that are by right. Other than, excuse me, I misspoke. There is recreational facilities, parks, campgrounds, things of that nature. Anything else commercial or industrial oriented would be under the special use permit. And even those are pretty restricted to things like gun clubs or a shooting range, private airport, veterinarians' offices. So there, and then from an industrial standpoint, there are essentially no industrial uses allowed in that district. So if they wanted to do something like that in a rural area, they would need to get a rezoning, yes.
So if anything requires a special use permit, we could require landscaping as part of that special use, right?
Correct.
Okay.
All right, so let me go back to the document here. I think the next language change, so as you'll see, I sort of restructured in terms of the indentation and the lettering and things like that, cleaned up some of that because it was hard to read. The next language change is going to be J, which is screening. I think that's the 4th page. JB talks about screening of utility substations and mechanical equipment. The language previously required that it be screened by evergreens. I've added that it can be screened by shrubs or decorative wooden fencing just to add some more flexibility there. It still has the rest of the requirements that the screening would need to be at least 6 inches higher than the equipment. And then if it's a plant, it would need to be within 2 years of planting. Continuing on down to street trees. double check what's changed here off the top of my head. Not seeing anything too glaring that's changed. So like I said, I think my main work was just in clarifying the language and cleaning up the indentation and the numbering of content, just so it's a bit easier to read.
I have a question.
Sure.
On street trees B, I'm confused by the language where you got public right of way in there. Because the tree lawn is within the public right of way. So if you're saying it's the area defined from the edge of the public right of way toward the interior of the lot, that makes no sense.
Well, that would be why it says public right of way, edge of the road shoulder, or the back of the curb. Because there are instances in the township, at least from looking at GIS, where that may not necessarily be the case. I understand that that's the general lay of how things work, but that's why those other two items are in there, just to cover other instances where if there was an instance where the road right of way may not necessarily go onto the front lawn.
I'm still confused. Because we're actually measuring, my understanding is the tree lawn is going to be something that's going to be parallel to the street, be it the
Correct.
front lawn or the side lawn, either one. But if we're saying the edge of the public right of way, the tree lawn shall be defined as an area from the edge of the public right of way toward the interior of the lot.
There are 9 or
Measuring
10
12
words
feet.
in there that you just skipped over.
Yeah, but those other ones don't bother me. Those are all okay. They make sense.
What I'm saying, Ray, is those are the catch-alls. It doesn't necessarily, if you look at public right of way as A, edge of the road shoulder is B, and back of the curb is C, it's A, B, or C. So if A causes a problem, then you move on to B. If B works, great. If B doesn't work, then it would be C.
When would A ever work? That's my question, I guess.
I am not in charge of the road right of way. It's solely there as a catch-all.
But for A to work, then the tree lawn would have to be on private property. Is that correct?
So the instance where you have public right of way, the general standard is that it's 33 feet in each direction from the middle of the road. You know that, of course.
Right, yeah.
The public right of way, if it falls in the front lawn, it's still private property, but the road commission has an easement on that.
By
Correct.
way of example, wouldn't Saginaw Street, for instance, by Meyer and going down through there, that all of that would apply to that provision, right?
Yes. In theory, yes.
Because it's outside the road right of way. It's a much wider road right of way, but it would be just outside the edge of the public right of way. If I'm putting this together in my own head, right?
That's the only type of instance I can think of, is if you have a road that has multiple lanes and is quite wide.
Yeah, so for that to work, then they would have the sidewalk or the tree lawn would be an easement if it's going to be a public tree lawn.
It's still the responsibility of the property owner to maintain the trees. So
Right.
I guess
doesn't
I'm
matter.
not fully seeing the problem. I'm not trying to be rude. I'm not
Yeah.
understanding what the
Maybe,
problem is.
maybe it's just a mute issue that I'm just kind of thinking that you could remove that public right of way A right out of there. And it would still make sense. But I guess if you leave it in there, it doesn't hurt anything.
Yeah. Well, and all right. So I'll check with the road commission and whether they think that's a necessary. What is that?
MB.
MB. Check with road commission. Okay. Okay. All right. Made a note of that. I'll give them a call tomorrow. Oh, I apologize. So there is one more change I want to point out, actually, in that same point. So the next sentence talks about the width of the tree lawn. Previous iterations of the draft language had it at 6 feet. In having conversations at our last meeting and then doing some research myself, not only in driving around, but looking at Google Maps views of communities, not only around Lansing, but also a couple different communities across the country. Generally, that tree lawn was much wider than that. So I've increased that number to 12 feet. I think that in instances may be a bit too generous, but it's much better than 6 feet in my opinion. I know we did at one point talk about having two different standards, one for residential and one for non-residential. I'm curious as to what anyone's thoughts are on that, if we should have those two different standards based on the land use.
They'll pretty much still be in line, right?
I'm sorry?
They'll still be in line pretty much.
Yeah, I think the
Not
discussion
that,
was whether or not there would be instances where that tree lawn being 12 feet wide, or whatever number we settle on, it might be too wide.
Any commissioners got any comments for Nick about the tree lawn width?
No, I like the wider width.
Is there still an interest in having a second standard for non-residential? Okay, I'm not hearing anything.
Nor am I.
Okay. Okay. The language, the placement near utilities, which would be ME1, previously that had said, it had given a specific number of feet. I think it was 10 feet. It was rightly pointed out that there could be situations where that would be problematic just from adhering to the letter of the law standpoint. That language has just been changed to say that the street trees should be planted so that they don't interfere with any of those utilities. Again, I think this is an area of language where I could still toy with it a little bit in terms of whether those street trees end up underneath an overhead utility line of sorts or not. But in general, I just wanted that to be a little bit more flexible so that we didn't have any issues. And I will say too, in general, I've spoken with the road commission. They've seen this ordinance and they generally are comfortable with all the provisions of it. They don't see any significant issues. So are there, other questions or comments about this?
At the extent of the changes, Nick,
Yes, sir.
proposed changes?
Nick,
What's-
can I ask about the screening again?
Sure.
So the wooden fencing, that feels like it would be easily removed. So if a development comes in and they put wooden fencing around, they sell the house, it just feels like it would be super easy for the homeowner to be like, I don't want this fencing, and then it to be uncovered.
Yep. So then that would end up being an instance where they would be in violation of the approved site plan. And so they certainly could be issued with a municipal civil infraction if that's something that we deemed appropriate.
Yeah, I just think the average homeowner would never think even,
Yeah. And I think
that
that's
would blow
fair.
their mind. And I think the likelihood that we'd actually catch that would also be very slim.
I think that's fair. I think there's certainly merit to screening things, but I do hear where you're coming from. Does anyone else have thoughts on that? It would be JB.
Any other comments for Nick about that?
well, chainsaw would take care of anything too.
Yep.
Even the fence.
Yeah.
Ray, did you have something?
Not on that issue, no. I did have one other comment on, I gotta find it again now. On F1, maintenance of street trees. Is everybody clear about that? I think I know what the intent is. The intent is that the property owner adjacent to a street tree that's in the right of way is responsible for that street tree. Because for the most part, street trees are not going to be on the private property, but once in a while there may be. But I just want to make sure that it's clear that the property owner is responsible for that street tree that's in the right of way, adjacent to his property. If that says that, that's fine.
That's how it's intended to read.
Yeah.
Has anyone else got an issue with that? Okay, what's the pleasure of the commissioners? Do you want to look at this more? Do you want to take a vote on it? Do you want to send it up to the board? What would you like to do? Go ahead, George.
I have a question on the fence. So do you think that the fencing's too easy too? Like easier than planning? I mean, it's probably not any cheaper
As
nowadays.
it relates to the screening.
Yes.
Um,
I just wondered why it was in there.
well, I just wanted
It don't
to
matter
provide-
to me. I don't have any preference. I was just.
Yeah, my intent was just to provide some sort of an alternative. Excuse me, if they felt that that was something that, excuse me, that was appropriate. They certainly could.
I don't think that today's wood prices would be any cheaper.
Yeah, I agree with you on that point for sure.
And it does say decorative.
Define that.
Yeah,
So-
go ahead.
I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry, Nick. I'm just saying.
Decorative is a pretty subjective term, isn't it?
Sorry, I accidentally punched my laptop.
Go ahead, George.
Are we wanting to approve this today? Can we approve it with Ray's question? Is that what we're looking to do today?
I think it's up to the commissioners, whatever you'd like to do. You want to take another look at this with those changes that we've suggested? Or you want to send it to the board? What's your pleasure?
I'm comfortable
just-
sending it to the board. I mean, we beat it up pretty good.
I see a couple of minor typographical things in that, like there are a couple spots where there's a comma where there should be a period or vice versa. But in terms of the content, I'm quite comfortable with it. And, you know, I don't have any reservations about you all sending it to the board.
If you want a couple of typo things, I give you a couple that I found.
How about you email me?
I can do that.
I was gonna say Taylor can look at it too and clean it up if it needs to be.
Well, I'll make a motion that we send it to the township board.
Okay, is there a second?
Do we do that before we approve it? Or no?
Do what?
Do we have to approve this as written before sending it or no?
I think you can motion to send it to the board.
If there's
With-
typographical errors, they can be corrected before it goes to the board.
Yeah, I have no intention of changing any of the content. The only thing that may change is if what Ray had pointed out about that inclusion of the term public right of way, that may get taken out. But aside from that, there wouldn't be any changes in terms of content.
And that you're running by the road commission anyway, right?
Yes.
Okay. My motion still stands.
I'll support.
Okay. What's your pleasure, commissioners? You want to vote on this? Well, we got to vote on it. Do you want a roll call vote or you want a voice vote?
Probably should be a roll call.
Okay. Nick,
Yep, I'm writing out names. Sorry, just one second.
that's fine. Let us know when you're ready. Just start calling names.
I'm a lefty. If I write too quickly, it won't be legible.
I know all about it.
At any rate.
Does anybody need the motion repeated before we vote? Okay, hearing none, go ahead, Nick.
All right. Baker,
Yes.
Gutsky,
Yes.
Reich,
No.
Severie,
Yes.
and Fewens Bliss.
Yes.
Okay, you want to put this on the agenda, Nick, for the next board meeting then, please?
That's my plan.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
See Karen nodding her head, so I take it it'll happen.
It will.
Okay. All right. So just the last item we have is the architectural standards. What I've presented this evening is just the site design components of that. I felt that talking about actual architectural standards warranted a little bit more time for research. Fee has been helping me with this, particularly on the building design component side. So once we get to that, I'll have her speak to this as well. So I've looked at a handful of these design guidelines from at least 5 different states. I think that there are quite a few arguments to be made in terms of why these components that I've provided before you are appropriate. Again, it may have gone overboard, but I would rather have given you too much and then we agree to cut things out rather than vice versa. So I'm happy to go over these point by point, or if there are certain ones that people have issues with, we can jump to those however you all want to approach this.
Okay, let's give Nick some feedback. What would you like to do? Point by point, or how do you want to handle this, gentlemen?
Is there a document I'm not seeing, or is it just the images?
No, it's in the packet right after the draft landscape ordinance.
Okay.
I mean, I think it's troublesome for me looking at this is from Voldemort, California, right?
Well, it's even before that. So that's the sample that I had provided just to get people thinking a little bit more.
Gotcha.
You know, again, these
back
would
up
be,
a little bit here. Okay,
Yep.
now I'm there.
so it's a 2-pager.
Yeah,
Just has the title site design components at the top of the first page. So again, these are intended to be guidelines. They're not going to be in our ordinance. This is just whatever we end up coming up with is something that we would give to a developer when they come in the door to have a pre-application meeting. You know, again, with the hopes of saying like, hey, it would be great if you followed these, but you know, again, it's not in the ordinance, so it's not binding. And that certainly gets around some of the possible issues with the zoning ordinance as it relates to interfering with the building code. So just the first section there just talks about open space. You know, some of these are already stated in other points in our ordinance, just that, you know, the design of the site should try to respect the existing characteristics of the site and preserve open space as much as reasonably possible. It talks about preserving sight lines and designated open space, and then ensuring that there's not, ensuring that there is some level of appropriate blending between sites so you don't have abrupt changes in design or landscaping. Grading, you know, the language here just talks about not overly grading, only doing it to the extent necessary, and protecting mature trees and improving surface drainage, things like that. Building orientation, as we've talked about, we really, in certain zoning districts, want to encourage walkability, particularly on sites where there are sidewalks. So again, this is worded pretty flexibly in that it's encouraging it in the development and high density development districts, and then the other districts it's encouraged where it's appropriate. As I'm sure you all have figured out by now, I've become a bit infatuated with parking lately. So there are quite a few points here about parking. Kind of tying in with the previous point about the building orientation in the development and high density development, really encouraging off-street parking to be to the side or behind the building to the fullest extent possible, if it's appropriate. There's some language in here about breaking up parking areas with the landscaping islands and landscaping strips. Kind of was adding that at the same time. I've been working on the landscape ordinance language about the landscaping and parking areas. Sort of was a catch-all in case for some reason the parking language in that part of the landscape ordinance got axed. And then to promote pedestrian circulation in parking lots, with some language added there. And then just talking about screening those parking areas from the public roads where it's possible through any different variety of means. As we get to site access, just talking about trying to, I would say that the big picture there is trying to prevent a curb cut every 100 or a couple hundred feet. I don't know about you all, but it drives me crazy when I'm driving down a road and see that, because it often leads to awkward situations where it looks like somebody has their turn signal on forever. And having fewer curb cuts can reduce the incidences of rear end automobile crashes. And that also ties in with the language there about keeping driveways or curb cuts away from street intersections.
Yeah, John, I think I'd like to say I like the discretion that's given to the commission when we look at guidelines such as this, rather than a tight ordinance, which you can never put into it what you really need into it. It's nice having the discretion to go back to the applicant and say, we think this would be better, and it offers much better dialogue between the applicant and the commission than some rigid kind of performance exam they've got to go through in order to do a project. So overall, I like this kind of concept myself personally.
Well, and often what I've found is that when I'm attempting to have any sort of discussion or negotiation with a developer, they often defer to what the planning commission is interested in, obviously, because you all are the ones voting on it. So that's sort of where that mindset comes from.
Nick, do we know on driveways close to street intersections, does the county have standards for that? Usually counties have standards based on speed limit on the street and traffic volume and things like that, that your driveways can't be within certain distance from intersections. I don't know if the county has any of those or not.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I would think they do. I had attempted to access their standards just in general, but there were some technical issues with that. So, again, I'll be in touch with the road commission tomorrow, so I'll ask about that.
Yeah, I think your statement is fine. I figured they might have some standards though.
No, that's a fair point.
Any more comments for Nick?
I'm just noticing we have someone in the meeting whose name is Farm Chic LOL. So someone's at least looking at the packet. I can appreciate that. And I can talk about that example that was included too, if people are interested in that. That was more to get people thinking than anything.
Have anything else, Nick?
No, I mean, I'm happy to go through the Wildemar example, but again, that's just from California, and really more than even the content was the structure of it, in that they talk about the forming and massing of the building, the roof designs, the wall and windows, materials and colors, decorative accents and details. That structure is what jumped out to me more than anything. And obviously, architecture in terms of what is and isn't appropriate is going to be very subjective depending on who you're talking to. So other than that, I don't really have anything to add for that.
Okay, commissioners, how do you want to proceed on this? You want to send this to the board? I think. as a
No,
matter of
John, I'm
courtesy-
sorry. We're not, I'm definitely not ready for this to go to the board.
Okay, good.
But I appreciate your eagerness.
Well, I don't
I'll
know
see
what.
what I can get you to agree to next time.
Want to talk about this more, commissioners, and make some more revisions? What's your pleasure?
I'd like to give it a little more thought. I mean, the Voldemort thing is, having been to California enough, I know flat or very not steep roofs aren't going to work here like they do in Southern California. But I mean, a lot of the ideas in there are pretty unique and kind of trendy compared to Bath standards, right? I mean, but as far as the overall architectural design standards, I'm fine with it really the way it is. And if we need to expand on it even, I'd like to even talk about that some more.
Yeah, so my intention the next time this comes back is to hopefully have some of the actual building design pieces of that so that we can have a bigger discussion. This won't be at the next meeting on the 29th because we have a pretty heavy agenda on some other items, which I'll get to when we get to report from planner here in a moment. But my expectation is that this likely would be the first meeting in July.
Now, we've still got the ordinance revisions that we've been going over too. Those haven't changed, have they? I mean, this guideline won't change the ordinance that we put in, or will it?
It will not.
Okay.
So, of course, we do still have that language. We have not had a public hearing on that. And even though I think those changes that we've included in that ordinance are relatively minor, we are, of course, because it's a zoning ordinance change required by state law to have a public hearing.
Right.
So
Okay.
if there's interest in that, I wouldn't be against setting a public hearing date for that. We certainly could do the 29th if we wanted to, but like I said, it's already a pretty heavy agenda. So I think it might make more sense to wait until July 13th.
Yeah, I think we should wait till 13th.
So would you like to schedule a public hearing then on the 13th for the landscape or for the architectural ordinance?
Yeah, if you all are comfortable with it, then I would like to.
What's the consensus?
Fine with it.
Yep, me too.
George? Okay, let's go ahead with that, Nick.
Winston says yes too.
Okay,
All right, great. So we'll schedule that for the 13th.
that's July the 13th, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and we're going to take another look at the recommendations for this architectural standards.
Yeah, yes. So the guidelines, I expect that we'll certainly take our time with that, especially since it's not going to be directly related to any ordinance change. We definitely will have our chance to make changes and take our time and make sure that we get it right. You don't think we're going to get it right?
All right, let's move on, Nick.
All right, so next is that me again?
Yep,
Yep, okay, great. Report from planner.
yes.
Let me flip back to my first page here, make sure I've got that in front of me. Just a couple of things. So yesterday was the first in a 4-part webinar series that I am attending through Michigan State Extension that talks about agriculture and agritourism oriented towards Michigan, talking about ways that we can strengthen and revitalize our agriculture sector. If nothing else, it's been very interesting and I'm looking forward to that. So I just wanted to share about that. Those are the next 3 weeks on Monday at noon. If any of the commissioners are interested, I'd certainly would not be opposed to booking the conference room to watch that. Another thing, as you all know, construction prices have gotten really high. And at least from my observation, and again, this is anecdotal, but it does appear that new housing construction in the township does seem to be slowing down a little bit. I feel like this time last year and the weeks following, we had quite a few plans for houses that were coming in and out of my department and the building department. And I think I've seen 2 or 3 houses in the past month. So I think that's really hitting that sector of the economy. However, everyone and their brother is wanting to put in a pool right now. So I guess that's not a surprise, but we've had an extremely large number of people applying for pools, more than I can recall in last summer. So that's definitely taking off.
Can you know who those people are, Nick?
You want to, well, Joel, yeah.
I need some new friends. Hey, Joel, I'll talk to you later.
Yeah, you and Joel are going to be best buddies now.
Wait.
So
Just kidding.
Yeah, I'd say in the past month, we've probably had at least 15 applications for pools, which may not seem like a lot, but compared to how many I remember seeing last year, it's definitely higher. And then last thing, today I had a meeting with Lou Ide and his new engineer for that parcel that he has in Somerset. They are intending to go forward with their concept for townhouses on that property. What I'm going to do here is just pull up the very... You couldn't wait 5 minutes? Thank you for your patience, everybody. They've provided a very rough sketch plan of what they're looking to do. And I have that if I can find it in my email. And I'll screen share just so you all can see it. Okay, I wanted to make sure it was oriented correctly. It was upside down in my email. So here's that. So as you recall, the proposal last summer was for initially, I think it was 12 apartment buildings. There had been expressed concern about the density of that, among other issues. The proposal here is 116 townhouses. Their intention is to come to the Planning Commission meeting on the 29th and present their preliminary concept, excuse me, which I expect will be a little bit more fleshed out than this, but maybe not much more. These are, individual townhouses that will be sold individually. Still waiting for some clarification about how the open space in between those will be maintained, but I expect I'll have that information in the coming weeks. So, personally, I'm happy with this concept. I like this better than more apartments. If there's any very early feedback that you all would like me to relay to Mr. Ide or his engineer, I'm happy to do that. But I do recognize as well that there's not a whole lot of information to go off here.
Yeah, I'm certainly not opposed to further development there, but I think at some point in the very, very near future, we're going to have to request a traffic study be done and further egress and ingress to that property maybe be explored, or a traffic light, for instance. It's getting pretty sporty down there by the entrance to that place, as I'm sure all of you have experienced yourself. And now with the Greater Lansing Food Bank there as well, with slower trucks and vans pulling in and out of there, and people trying to dodge people coming over the hill. I'm more than a little bit concerned about safety down there. At some point, we got to address it.
When was the last traffic study conducted, Nick?
That would have been fall of 2019. So that was
Okay.
before the food bank.
Before the food bank.
certainly. The conclusion from that traffic study, I believe, was oriented towards that original design of having the 12 apartment buildings, which totaled 200 and some units. And the conclusion was that there was no need for an additional lane or a turn lane or anything like that. You know, I know that there's certainly fundamental disagreement on that. I don't personally have an opinion on that one way or another, but
Well, nothing against civil engineers, Ray, but I'd like an engineer to come over the hill with me some morning when I'm trying to get to the highway and you know, see what you see right there. And I think it's really our responsibility to look at this closely and do whatever we do right. And I don't know what the possibility is, carving another drive through the swamp there, you know, down by the highway entrance and getting people to turn in and out through that way. But I really am concerned about that hill and further traffic snarling it up. I mean, I think we've got a big responsibility there.
No, I agree, Joel. I brought that up when this food bank first went in. I think there needs to be a left turn lane for both directions there.
Need to do something.
One for the trucks turning in and one for the people coming over that hill that want to turn left into the development. So
Well, Nick, you may want to explore with them too. I don't know what kind of property access they have off Drumheller, but they may have to pave a portion of Drumheller and bring it up to standard and put a drive in through there. I don't know. But I can guarantee you, I'll be looking at it pretty hard when the time comes.
yep.
I think the other thing is, if we do get a new traffic study, I want to look at it. I used to do those traffic studies. So I want to see why they're not recommending something.
Well,
Yeah,
I think they're just throwing it at the developer and saying, here, go do it. And they're leaving it on people like us to ask hard questions and demand hard answers.
Yeah. And I don't think the development is done on Kessler's side at all. So it's going to continue to be a problem.
Just
Yeah.
my initial thought.
Yeah.
It sure would be better to be proactive than reactive or wait till somebody dies before we do something in this instance.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I like I'm sorry. I like the green space up in the 2 where you have 30 units in the 16, the number 30 and 16 in those quadrants. The green space is much better in those. I would also like to see either the planning commission or Mr. Ide determine what phases, I can't imagine he's going to be doing this all at once. So what phases these would be built in, so that we understand in what order and they'd be coming in.
That was something he talked about this morning, was phasing. And so, you know, that's certainly something that he would be required to indicate on the plans. If and when that is determined how it's going to be phased out. I will say too, just as it relates to traffic, obviously, because this outlets onto Webster Road, I think this is, you know, yet another piece of the puzzle for the Webster Road Committee to look at. So I can bring this to the next Webster Road Committee meeting if we want to talk about it a little bit as well.
Yeah, that would be good. What was his implementation time, or would it be this year yet that he would start, or next year?
I don't know that was fully expressed. There were certainly questions asked about time frame in terms of getting it approved. So from that standpoint, I get the impression that they have interest in doing something this year still, but that would, of course, have a number of different variables. You know, the way this is currently laid out, it would require a special use permit. I do want to reiterate again, I think that there's some problematic language in our ordinance in that whether it's a by right use or a special use permit being required hinges on whether or not the building has 8 units or not. So there was some discussion this morning of them looking at separating these townhouses into clumps of 8 so that it would only require site plan approval.
So he's trying to bypass.
Well, we may want to look at density rather than numbers of units then.
Yeah. Well, the other thing too is, to me, this looks really packed together.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody familiar with the development is very similar. This is on the south side of State Road, just it's in DeWitt Township, but or maybe I think it's actually in the city of East Lansing now. But go look at that, because this to me looks like that's going to look very much like that, and it's really not a pretty site.
I agree,
So,
Ray.
my recollection from this morning is they said that generally this compared to the previous proposal is this is about 30% less dense. My guess is that would be based on ground cover or lot coverage, because as you'll remember from the proposal from last year, there was, just honestly because of our parking requirements, there was a sea of parking. It was 400 and something parking spaces, and it, no matter how they tried to orient it, it was just sort of an eyesore. So from that standpoint, the parking requirements for this are being fulfilled by the driveways with the individual garages. So from that standpoint, I consider this, a small victory in that regard. But I do think that there is still legitimate concern or question about the tightness, particularly on that west side, which would be where it says 26 or 20. Yeah. It's pretty tight in there. There was, funnily enough, there were questions about whether or not the sidewalks in there were really required. And I said, yes, we have an ordinance that states that those are required. I'm not going to go too much further, but I think a developer would be remiss not to include sidewalks in this area.
We got to make sure.
I'm sorry.
We got to make sure we got enough distance between the sidewalk and the front of the garage to park a car without encroaching on the sidewalk.
Yep.
Would these be rentals, or would this be a purchase option?
I never had a firm answer from them today, but it's my understanding that IDE Company's typical mode of operation for townhouses is that they sell them individually.
So they're site condos?
Yeah, I had a discussion with our zoning administrator, Bert Gale, about that today as to how that would be handled. So we don't have a conclusive answer on that either, and that may delay some things, but that's on my to-do list for tomorrow in terms of determining exactly how for example, the common open space would be handled in terms of maintenance. My gut is telling me that site condos would be one direction that he could pursue, though.
Is there a price point?
I didn't get that information either, no. It still seemed to be pretty early in the idea stages. Just my general experience in the way that this group operates compared to other developers seems to be, sort of floating out the loose concept, and then if there's buy-in, then charging full steam ahead as quickly as possible. I'm not one to say one way or another publicly whether I really think that that's the right approach, but that's what we've seen last year and what we see here.
He's looking for feedback. I would say that his blocks 26 and 20 are too dense.
Yeah.
Not enough open space. And it looks to me like he might have an issue with area 24 because of the encroachment on the wetland. But I'm not sure. This is not detailed enough to really draw a conclusion.
And forgive me because I'm not wise in the ways of planning, but would the 26, where the number 26 is and the 30 is, would those really allow, are they going to pull right onto Somerset?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm skeptical of whether that's a good idea as well.
I
I
don't know how many hundreds or even thousands of people that live back there in those current units, but that seems sketchy to me.
I am inclined to agree on that. The other thing is this hasn't even gone through a review in terms of ensuring that it adheres to the setbacks. So there certainly are going to be setback issues, more than likely. So I think this number of units is sort of a let's fit as many as we possibly can type of situation. I can't blame a developer for feeling that way. I just hope that there's not extreme pushback on that when it's made clear that it doesn't adhere to the ordinance.
We'll get there, right?
Might be a long process, Joel, but we'll get there.
Yeah. So just wanted to present this as a quick introduction. Certainly don't want to take up too much time with it. I think that was the only other thing I had on my list of report from planner, just those three things. So I don't know if anyone has any other questions or anything they'd like updates on, but if they do, I'd be happy to provide information.
Any comments, commissioners? Okay, let's move forward then. I think we have a report from the superintendent. Any updates, Karen?
Not at this time. I appreciating you let me join you and learn from you all. Other than that, I'd be happy to, I think public comment is up next, but.
Yep.
Okay. If anybody would like to make a public statement at this time, you can raise your hand or you can dial *9. Or you can raise your physical hand as well. Looks like Jeff would like to make a public statement. Go ahead, Jeff.
I just didn't get a chance to at the end of our presentation about our project, but I wanted to thank the Planning Commission for taking the time to hear us, and hopefully we're able to move forward on our project.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff.
Any other comments, Karen?
I'm not seeing any at this time.
All right, let's, any comments from commissioners?
Sorry, John, we have a report from trustee still, right?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Ryan. I overlooked you. Yes, we do. My apologies.
It's okay. I don't have much to share with you, but because of the way that the dates in this month fell, we actually, as was mentioned earlier, met last night. We heard from the supervisor discuss updating ordinance 74.1, which would change how we do the sewer board of appeals to change to 3-year terms, but also to add a provision to allow non-resident business owners from also serving on the sewer board of appeals. As you heard earlier, A&D repair expansion was approved. We heard first reading of ordinance 44.1 for Consumers Energy Company. That's the piece that we all took a look at and sent back to the board a few weeks ago. So we continue to think and talk about that. And then, you know, the big news was what I had shared with you last meeting. We introduced and approved the first reading of ordinance 63.2, which would dissolve the DDA. And that was moved forward for second reading, which we will hear in 2 weeks. Other than that, that's about what the board could manage in 3+ hours last night.
Go ahead, George.
Well, you said 44.1 Consumers Energy. Is that Consumers Energy or WOW? That was Consumers Energy that was.
You sent WOW back to the board.
Oh, you're right. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. I just got confused for a second.
Well, clearly I was the one confused. No, you were
No,
right.
that's fine. I was just threw me off. Okay, good. Thank you, Ryan.
Thanks, Ryan. Any comments from commissioners?
I have one. A
Go
couple.
ahead, George.
Congratulations, Nick. Appreciate you stepping in and getting right to work. And I know you put in a lot of extra time. It's appreciated by all of us, I'm sure. Thanks for the census information you sent out. That was pretty good. And I also appreciate all the classes and the info that you send out for us to, a couple of them YouTube things that I've watched have been very informative. I wished I could retain some of that stuff, like when I was messing around when I was a kid, some of the jokes, but I have to watch it a couple of times to get it in my brain. So thanks for all that information. And I missed Dan tonight, so appreciate all of you.
Thank you, George.
John, can I jump in real quick?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Two things. I do want to let you all know, I heard from Dan, he had something that came up that was urgent. But, you know, as far as I understand, everything's okay. So aside from that, as I'd said in that email, we did get sort of a rough census estimate of the population. I forgot to mention this during report from planner. Sort of the number I've been jumping around with is roughly 13,500 was my guess for 2020. I wasn't too far off. We have about 13,070. That's the estimate for 2020 from the Census Bureau. I'm sure that number will tweak a little bit, but I can't imagine it would be more than 10 or 15 people in either direction. And as we continue to get more and more specific detailed census info from the federal government, I'll be happy to pass that along. And then of course, once we have the complete 2020 census released, we can go about updating that part of the comprehensive plan.
Yes. Yep. Very good. Thank you, Nick. Any other comments from commissioners? Nobody wants to say anything more? Really? Motion to adjourn?
I'll move to adjourn.
Is there a second? Thank you, Ray. Those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Yes, it is adjourned.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Have a
Thank
good night, everybody.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, everybody. Hope you have a great evening.
You
Yeah,
too,
John.
John.